We've moved from a competition for attention to a competition for attachment, affection, intimacy.
How do you think we should balance that, like slowing down the negative effects versus letting the scientists working for a positive cause run free and effectively?
We design our technology, but afterwards our technology designs us. In an age of AI, some of the most important skills are the most deeply human skills. AI is philosophy on a deadline.
Personally, a prompt which I love giving to AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude: you are a grumpy reviewer, please tear apart my arguments.
Yeah, that's a good example of you've learned curiosity and metacognition, right?
It's accurate to say that AI is for cognitive labor, but the Industrial Revolution was for physical labor.
That's the billion-dollar question. Your generation deserves an answer to that question. The same dossier that makes for a caring assistant also makes for a con man.
Welcome to another episode of the Shiv Nadar School Podcast. I am Tanet Khitan, a student of grade 11 from Shiv Nadar School, Gurgaon, and today with us we have Mr. Daniel Bake, an esteemed technologist working towards AI safety. He is also the executive director at the Center for Human Technology. Mr. Bake, it's a pleasure to have you here. So there's been a lot of buzz around AI, of course, what people are missing and maybe overlooking with respect to these AI models and in the race to create this best AI model.
If we step back, me personally, I spent my whole career in technology. I was at Google, I was at various startups across Silicon Valley. And when you're in technology, like I love technology. We all entered technology basically to try to build a better future. But we have a bad history in technology, trying to build a better future, but we keep driving the car into ditches by the side of the road. So take social media. We're going to connect the world. We're going to connect everyone to each other, to their interests. Meanwhile, we ended up creating polarization and outrage and undermining democracy and all of these problems. Why? Because we didn't think about the incentives. And the incentives were to capture our attention and to keep our attention, even if you didn't want to. You know, I joke that after TikTok came out, I have 5 versions of TikTok on my phone because YouTube became TikTok, Instagram became TikTok. Everybody had to become TikTok. Why? Because attention was the thing you needed to capture. So we try to raise awareness about what's happening. What is the new capabilities in the technology? What is the game theory, the incentives that everyone is competing for that end up shaping the race for the technology? And how does that affect our psychology, our relationships, our institutions? Because ultimately, if we want to build the beautiful future with technology, we have to be wiser. We have to have more foresight, and we have to have the right language to discuss what's even happening to us. So our role is to be in the ecosystem, a voice for here's what's happening to you. Here's why you're feeling what you're feeling. Here's why you're about to experience this, so that we can all choose a better future.
Got it. So in your opinion, what's the best way to re-incentivize or shift the direction of the incentives that these companies currently have to be able to build this better future?
Okay, so first you have to understand what the incentives are. So I just talked about the race for attention, which was basically the last decade, right? Now AI has a whole bunch of different incentives, right? And the problem is you talk about AI, you're not talking, it sounds like you're talking about one thing, but you're not. You know, you talk with the best people and you start talking about AI, and pretty soon you're talking about the economy, and then you're talking about warfare, and then you're talking about childhood development, and then you're talking, all the conversations in the world end up becoming conversations about AI because AI touches all the different parts of our world. So why do I say that? Because there are different incentives depending on where you look. But one of the incentives that it's important to talk about is we've moved from a competition for attention to a competition for attachment, affection, intimacy. Why is that? Because you and I are both just going to use the AI product that feels like it just understands us, right? The AI product that feels like it just gets me. I use this one because it just understands me, Well, what does it mean for you to understand me? An AI product has to understand my motivations, my ambitions, my hopes, my fears, my personality quirks. And so to build that understanding, the AI is creating a dossier, deep understanding of all of these parts of me. But importantly, the same dossier that makes for a caring assistant also makes for a con man. So that same intimate knowledge of me that lets someone help me also lets someone hurt me. And this is why there's this race for intimacy, a race to become attached to us. So we have to understand the dynamics of that race, and then you have to shift that race. So how do you shift it? There's two ways to shift it. One is better designs. So for example, the way that memories is used in LLMs. Right now, with most AI products, there's one monolithic memory, and it's quite surprising and somewhat shocking when you type a new search or you type a new chat in an LLM, and it says, "Oh, I'm so glad you asked that because given that your trip to India and your wife and you're this, then," and you suddenly go, "Oh, I was asking about something completely different. Why did you?" It's sort of creepy, right?
Yeah.
Well, we should be designing memory that's compartmentalized. So a search that I'm doing about work shouldn't know about my personal life. A search I'm doing in my personal life maybe shouldn't know about my work. But there's no incentive to create that because the incentive is to get this big dossier on who I am. That's just one example of 10 or 20 or 30 different examples I could say about the design of the technology itself. But it's not just about how we design the technology, it's about how we regulate the technology because regulation stops races to the bottom. So one example is if you look at the history of cars. Ralph Nader wrote a very important book called Unsafe at Any Speed. And before he wrote the book, the American public thought that every car accident was the fault of the driver. And so if the driver got killed, got maimed, that it was their fault because they drove it wrong. And Ralph Nader flipped this script and said the design of the car itself was unsafe. And so you shouldn't just blame the driver, you should blame the car companies that are producing this. And because of that book and the public shift in consciousness, a company like Volvo could be made that said, we are the safety company, right? But before that book, it was really hard to make safety a feature that's sold in the marketplace. So it's a very long-winded way of saying you create better futures by the public awareness that there's a problem and the understanding of exactly what problem you live in, by regulations that stop some of the worst races to the bottom, and by better designs that actually create races to the top in safety, in development, in caring for human attention.
Understood. So, from the perspective of public awareness, do you feel that if we could create this general understanding that all the chatbots we're speaking to are just statistical next word predictors running on some server in a warehouse in some different country, do you think that could solve the problem of intimacy?
Okay, so you use a frame there that they're just next word predictors. On one hand, I agree that one of the problems is sort of like in the 90s. You're too young for this reference, but Tamagotchis and Furbies were these products that they seemed cute, but they weren't cute. They were just toys. They were just toys that beeped and booped, right? But they seemed like something to be cared for, and they took advantage of our instinct to care for something. And in that way, if you don't know what it is, we're all vulnerable to treating something as if it's this very deep friend, confidant, priest, teacher, therapist. So you're right. If we don't understand the shape of the technology, it's very easy to project onto the tech and treat it as if it's another human, which is a very dangerous thing. On the other hand, the language of it's just a statistical next word predictor, I think is a little misleading for people because yes, these things are trained to be next word predictors, but they're much more than that. Like if you actually look into the model, it learns very deep structure of the world, right? It is able to learn and reproduce deep understanding of human interactions, emotions, history, knowledge, inference. And so we shouldn't be treating it as if it's just an autocomplete bot either. These things are alien minds, right? And the important part to understand is the people even building these minds don't fully understand how they work. They know enough to make them. It doesn't mean that they know enough to understand exactly what they'll do. Nobody understands them fully. And so it's like aliens have landed, and now we're in conversation with aliens. And by the way, we've all spent the last few years getting used to chat interactions. It looks like a Google search, right? There's a box and you type in the box and it has a conversation back to you. And that's designed to feel familiar. But underneath that is a much more powerful, much more alien intelligence. And as we move from conversational AI chatbots to AI agents, right, where the AI doesn't just talk with us, it acts on our behalf in the world. People will start to feel how much more powerful these things are. They felt sort of cute. They felt like I talk to it talks to me. But the amount of power contained in this is actually quite impressive. And it's going to start to change our world in so many ways as we allow these things to do actions in the world on our behalf.
You were a signatory on, I think, the two major open letters that
Yeah.
were sent to these leading AI companies to pause AI development effectively. Um, what do you think will actually get these leaders to actually slow down and stop AI development? And do you think there are any geopolitical factors that play into it? Like, what's your opinion on that?
It's a great question. By the way, the field is split on these letters, right? Some people think the letters are incredibly important, and other people think the letters are incredibly stupid. And the split depends on what you think the letters meant to do, right? And a bunch of people who think it's stupid said, Daniel, why did you sign this? Because a pause letter is never going to cause anybody to pause. And I agree with them. I don't think it will cause anyone to pause. The point, in my view, wasn't to have the letter pause AI development. It was to make it clear that very smart, very intelligent people think that we're over our skis, think that we're playing with fire, think that we have harnessed something that is so much more powerful than we know how to imagine. And if everyone is able to see that very smart people, very serious people think that we are playing with fire, then maybe something can change. But your question was like, what makes people by the way, slow down is just one aspect. Yes, we should be more thoughtful. We should be slower. A bunch of AI experts have said, I wouldn't be as worried if I thought that AI was going to take 20 years, right? But it's going to take 3 or 5, to roll out. And the sheer speed of it all means that people are taking shortcuts. Companies are clamoring over each other. Countries are clamoring over each other to not get left behind. And meanwhile, the deeper question is like, what is the society we want to live in? Right. And if this is as powerful as we think it is, if this is the new electricity, the new fire, the new printing press, we should be thinking very carefully about what's the world we're trying to build. So your question was, what causes people to change? I don't know. That's the billion-dollar question, right?
Okay.
But it's got to be awareness of how deep the problems go. It's got to be that very intelligent people, including many of the people who built these very things, who dedicated their lives to building it, suddenly woke up. Geoffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, Stuart Russell, the people whose textbooks I read in college, suddenly said, hold on, this is, we spent our lives building it, and we think it's now so powerful that we risk. Well, there's many risks, right? We risk losing control. We risk it eroding society. There's so many risks. The point isn't to get trapped in the risk. And this is where I think this is a whole society-wide effort to enter the AI age, to make our societies empowered by AI, to use AI as a tool to lift us all up and be in the beautiful future that we want to live in, is the project of our generation. And it should take all of us to do it right. So what does it mean to do it right? It's to be more thoughtful. It's to be slower, right? But not slower because we're afraid, slower because measure twice, cut once, right? We want to end up in the beautiful future, not in the ditch by the side of the road. So what causes people to do it? I don't know, but a bunch of us are traveling around the world trying to send the message that we need to do something different.
Got it. So in this age of AI that we're about to enter, or we have already entered to some extent, what skills do you think students should focus on, or students should build on? Because we're entering a very uncertain future. We have no idea what the market will look like in the next 5 or 6 years, and no idea what jobs will be replaced.
It's the right question. And I talk with a lot of people. There's a podcast we're about to release with Rebecca Winthrop from Brookings. And they just released a report called a pre-mortem on how AI in education. So if you may have heard of a post-mortem. It's after something happens, what happened, what went wrong. They ran what's called a pre-mortem, which is, well, if we believe it's going to go wrong, where would it have gone wrong and why? So I talked with Rebecca about this question. She and I talk a lot about this question. And it's, what is the future that we're preparing students for? Actually, let me back up a little bit. When I was your age, we were just entering the computer era, right? I mean, honestly, like a few years. I mean, you're what, 11th grade?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I don't know. When I was in 7th grade, we were still using card card catalogs to find books in the library, right? I remember writing a term paper in 11th grade, and I had to go to the UCLA college library and find books in a card catalog to tell me where the books on the Vietnam War were that I was researching. Back then, when I was in high schools were still primarily about putting as much knowledge into your brain as possible, because if it wasn't in your brain, then you couldn't find it. And then computers and the internet happened. And over the last 20 years, the purpose of education has shifted from put the knowledge in your head to teach you how to find the knowledge when you need it. And now we're about to embark on an equally powerful, maybe much more powerful shift. Because what does education mean in a world where intelligence, cognition, is a public utility, right? When it's unclear what parts of life a human will be more intelligent or capable than a machine. Nobody knows the answer to that question. No adult you ever meet knows the answer. The heads of these companies, the heads of state, the teachers, the professors, nobody knows the answer. And the most intelligent people are trying to find an answer because your generation deserves an answer to that question. But here we are, we're building that future, and we don't know, nobody knows how many jobs are going to exist and where in the economy in a few years. Everyone, whether you're a CEO or whether you're an intellectual worker or whether you're a driver, everyone's feeling uncertain right now because the question is, the thing that I've spent my life preparing for, am I going to get to do that in a few years?
Yeah.
I don't know. Nobody knows. But I want to answer your question. I don't want to just dance around it. Your question is, what are the skills that I need? My answer is, ironically, the most human skills are the most useful. So the people who get supercharged by AI are the people who are curious and thoughtful and metacognitive. So the people who write an essay and then know how to ask an AI and say, where is my argument the weakest? What would the opposition to this essay say? What are the best arguments against my position? I'm learning a skill. What don't I know? And what is the right way to learn that skill? The reason why it's hard for people to ask these questions is it kind of hurts. You feel kind of naked asking these questions because we all want to appear capable and confident and bold and experts. And it's kind of hard to realize that actually the thing I need is a good reflection of myself. I want to know, please tell me what I don't know, what I'm not good at, where do I need to improve? And the skills that you need for that are deep emotional skills, centeredness, groundedness, openness, curiosity, empathy. And so it's a weird irony that in an age of AI, some of the most important skills are the most deeply human skills that we need to build. It's not about like prompt engineering or learn this technical. It's actually some of the most humble psychological openness skills that are needed in this time. And then not to mention that in all of the uncertainty of this moment, when we can't tell you what you're going to be doing in 5 years, all of us need the skill of being able to ride the waves of uncertainty, because all that we know is it's going to be turbulent. There's going to be a lot of displacement, a lot of change. And so the people who are able to ride this are going to be the people who are psychologically okay living in a time of change.
So effectively, we have to learn how to think or think about thinking.
How to think about thinking, but not just think about thinking, how to be with, right? How to sit with ourselves, how to be with each other. And by the way, this actually plays into the loneliness thing too. The other epidemic that is even more in the US, I think, than in India, but the loneliness epidemic is very real and growing globally. How do we stay connected to each other and not get lost searching for connection and soothing in our devices? How do we build deep and enduring relationships and support structures? All of these really human, squishy skills are going to become even more important.
So, I mean, just building on that, in an era where AI is designed to get as intimate to you as possible, how do you think we will continue, maintain human relationships and maintain their magnitude in a sense, and their importance? So, how do you think AI is going to affect that, and what should humanity as a civilization take steps for to kind of prevent relationships from ceasing to exist?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's a great question. I guess there's a few ways to do that. One is just as a user of the technology, right? As an individual, you can always ask the question, am I using the technology to improve my relationships, or am I using them to replace my relationships? Take a confidant. It's totally fine to need to be ability to think through something, but am I using this in a way where I'm getting the pleasure of connecting to someone, and I actually want to tell my deepest secrets to the AI instead of my friends, my family, because it's too vulnerable, right? Because I'm embarrassed. I don't want to put myself on a limb and try to connect to people. Well, that's like drinking seawater, right? It may feel good because you're drinking something, but you're going to be way more thirsty in a minute, right? And so not leaning so hard on the AI tools that you become dependent on them instead of humans, but instead people who use AI to figure out, how can I connect more deeply with those around me? How can I connect more deeply with my field, my passion? How do I find the information that I need in the world? How can I, those are the people who get accelerated and emboldened by the technology.
Understood. So, you've already mentioned this briefly in one of your first answers, but I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into who you think the responsibility should lie on when it comes to the regulation of AI and what happens when things go wrong.
Well, that's a good and deep question, and there's not one answer. But I will say, and I think this is the point you're implicitly making in your question, is markets tend to work well when harms end up on balance sheets, right? So by analogy, I often say, like, why is the self-driving is also an AI technology, right? We have AI now appearing and helping drive. Why is that going so well? You don't really hear about, scores of people dying by the roadsides with self-driving. Well, part of the reason is that the liability is so clear on the roads because we had 100 years of case law for cars. And so the companies know that if I run over 3 people, then
Companies dead,
there
right?
goes the company. Company's dead, right? So in that world, the general counsels, the lawyers who run the companies, are scared so badly, and they're as fast as the engineers and the product managers want to go, the lawyers are saying, hold on, we need to make sure we get this right. That's exactly where we want our lawyers. We want the lawyers of society to be risk mitigators. Unfortunately, in AI, it's different, right? In chat AI, in increasingly in agentic AI, because it's such a complicated liability landscape that the lawyers know that their role is not so much to be risk mitigators, but to be bulldogs. And they'll say, look, you go win the race for AI, and we'll make the court case take 5 years. And you go win that race, and I'll make sure that you don't have to deal with this court case. That's a terrible idea. That's not where we want our lawyers, right? So, okay, so where should the responsibilities be? Well, ultimately, on the companies that are building them and the people that are deploying them for malicious uses. How do we do that? Well, one, you need to make sure that the liability law is clear. 2, there's a concept in American law, and I don't know how, I'm not an expert in Indian law, and apologies for this, but there's a concept in American law called duty of care. And this is like if you're an airline, if I get on an airline, it doesn't matter if the airline had no idea that the jet engine would explode. If the jet engine explodes, the airline had a duty to take care of me while I was on that airline. And that's a beautiful concept because it means that in areas of uncertain risk, the person building and operating the system has a duty to care for everyone who pays for this. We need that kind of framework for AI because we don't know all the risks.
So, as for the race itself, where everyone's just trying to converge to AGI, do you think that is actually going to happen? How much time will it take to happen? And are these companies on the right track to make that happen?
Sure.
And is it even a good idea for that to happen in the first place?
Okay. I'm going to start with the mechanics first, and then we can talk about, is that a good idea or a bad idea? You should not take one person's answer of this, but if you look at the spectrum of people, some people think we're almost already at AGI. Some people think we're 2 years away. Some people think we're 10 years away. None of these are a very long time for something that is as consequential as. By the way, we should define AGI. There's many different definitions of AGI, and part of the problem is they mean very different things. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's say that AGI can do most, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, can do most, if not all, professional tasks better than a human can do it. So for something that's as powerful as that basically says any work that you do, you're better off giving to the AI, even 10 years is a very short period of time. Like even 10 years is like a light speed transition for all of society to move to that. So is it 2 years away? Is it 10 years away? I don't know. Nobody knows. But 10 years away shouldn't feel like relief, right? 10 years away should still feel like, oh my God, we're right on the verge of this thing. Your question is it a good idea?
Yeah.
Well, this is where you get into game theory. And the reason why it's all going so fast is people feel like if you can unleash the power of AGI, then you beat your competitors. Whether that's your competitor companies and you can do everything for cheaper, your competitor nations, your competitor individuals. This is one of the most tempting things to win whatever game you're playing. And that's why everyone is racing towards this so quickly. Is it a good idea? I think if we were being more careful, if we, 6 years ago, maybe at this point, it's 2026. So at this point, 10 years ago, I had thought that this would be developed in a lab. We wouldn't let this out until we were very clear what it is. And all of a sudden, it's all just being done in public. It's just being done in the markets. It's being developed as it's being told to run economies and infrastructures and psychology and therapy. And it's all being done in public. Why is it being done in public? Because it requires a lot of money. And so companies know that there's no country's science budget that is big enough to build this, right? So they've needed to go to the world's markets and try to get enough money to scale this. I think that's quite irresponsible to be doing this experiment at such a global scale. But ultimately, the promise is it could usher in a new age of abundance unlike we've ever seen. Like we could look back on this period like we look at the Dark Ages, like we look back at the medieval times. But we only get to that beautiful future if our society is stable enough to handle the change and to become that better version of ourselves. We don't get that future by just building a big weapon and shooting ourselves in the foot. And I think that's what we're on track to do.
But even in that, let's say, theoretical age of abundance, what do you think would be left for humans to do? And would humans anyway create conflict amongst themselves?
Yes. Well, this is the big question, right? I mean, work, human meaning and purpose is a huge part of what we do. And, the hardest part of all this stuff is how do you not fall into either simple story? And you'll find that most arguments in 2026 end by both parties saying that the other one is just being simple and stupid, right? I mean, I hate this, but some people will say work is the wellspring of all human meaning and purpose, right? And other people say, no, those people are being idiotic. It's monotonous. It takes me away from my purpose. I can't be with my family. I can't be with my kids. Work is just monotony. And the answer is it's both, right? Work is both. It is both incredible monotony and waste of human potential, and it is the deepest meaning and purpose for us. And notice that sitting with the apparent contradiction in that is what we need to do. So you'll hear answers to this question like universal basic income. Like if we just give income to everyone, but that may be necessary. But even if it's necessary, it's not sufficient, because what do you do with the lack of human meaning? And that's behind your question. Nobody knows the answer to these questions. Nick Bostrom is famous for saying that AI is philosophy on a deadline. Right? When I was in college, just a few years older than you, I did philosophy and computer science. And when I was doing that, there was this problem called the trolley problem. You may have heard of it at this point. And at the time, it was not so common, right? It's become sort of a more popular thing now. But back then, it was a way of just understanding the difference between these different theories of ethics. Like, if you believe they should pull the lever, then you must be a consequentialist. And if you not, you're a
utilitarianism, Kantianism, etc.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have heard of these, yeah.
Exactly. Well, now every self-driving car needs to have an answer to the trolley problem programmed into it, right? And so AI is philosophy on a deadline. So philosophy hasn't caught up to the question of what does human meaning and purpose look like if we don't have work. I will say that there is some examples. So you could say the same thing about warfare. And what we've done with warfare, team sports are a great example. So, soccer, I guess you call football, football, soccer, is a kind of fake tribal warfare that we've created, right? Where both people can feel like tribes, they can come together, they can get angry, and this is in psychology, this is called sublimation. So we all have this instinct for tribal violence. And nowadays with team sports, we sublimate that urge for tribal violence into team sports. Well, there may be things with the instinct to work, succeed, status competition, that we must sublimate. But like all of this is very theoretical and nobody knows the answer to this question.
Got it. So another question I had was that the very same AI models can both have a very good impact and a very bad impact on society. And if you ask people to pause or slow down or be cautious, you might prevent some of the bad effects. But let's say if someone's working on AI for medical research or to cure cancer or something like that, and if they are, if you pull the reins in on them and they're asked to slow down and be more cautious, they might feel like they're actually impeding their search to find a treatment, let's say, that could impact or benefit millions of people. So, how do you think we should balance that, like slowing down the negative effects versus letting the scientists working for a positive cause run free and effectively?
Part of the answer to your question, implicit in your question, is the idea that there's a single lever that's slow and fast, right? And I don't think that's true. I don't think you think that's true, right? There's not. In fact, take, for example, China. China just released draft legislation against anthropomorphic AI. This is AI that pretends to be human, right? When I talk to an AI and I say, I'm having a bad day, and the AI says, it breaks my heart to hear you're having a bad day. Okay, that's an AI pretending to have an inner world, to be a creature, have an inner life. Well, China has taken an internal stand and said that that is just harmful. That's harmful because it's very confusing for people. They demand that AI must remind you that it's an AI, not to confuse it from talking to a human. There's very simple regulation that we could do to not confuse ourselves about whether we're talking to a person or a machine, not confuse ourselves about what's real and fake, right? I mean, there's a bunch of these. We could put those into place that would make a lot of things slower that we should be going slower on. But it wouldn't be impeding medical research. It wouldn't be impeding cancer. It wouldn't be impeding all throughout history. So if you look at weapons programs, it's a great example. Most militaries have advanced weapons programs. They're working with, nuclear fissile material. They're working with chemical weapons. They're working with biological weapons often. It doesn't mean that we just let the biological weapons on the street. It doesn't mean that we don't have regulation. There are carve-outs in our society where we say these things can be studied by experts, but should stay over here as experts. And it's weird to me that, this is true across our society. It's true in aeronautics. It's true in biologics. It's true in medicine. But for some reason with AI, there's this argument that like, well, if you're interfering with it at all, then you must be wanting to, to be fair, I don't hear you making this argument, right? I don't blame you. But this is the state of our discussion. It's so blunt. It's like you're on team slow or you're on team I love the future. And I hate this because I'm on team I love the future and we should probably go a little slower and more careful in order to,
that makes sense. A different question altogether, but I heard you had said agency is the scarcest alive. So if you could elaborate on what exactly that means in this context.
So human agency, my ability, so that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But when I talk about agency, what I mean is who I want to be and become, my knowledge about what I'm trying to accomplish, my knowledge about the life I'm trying to build, the person I wish to become, the things I wish to do. It's hard to hold on to that. I mean, you're young still, but I walk into a room to get something and I walk into the room and I go, why am I in this room? And don't worry, that gets worse with age. But like holding on to our intentions, our motivations, our higher selves, our technology should be in service of that. Where our psychology, Jonathan Haidt calls this the elephant and the rider, right? We have this elephant that is our automatic systems, and we have the rider that is our agency, our intentionality, what we're trying to do. And that rider, the reason the elephant and the rider is such a powerful metaphor is that rider is very small with respect to that elephant. Our instincts, what we can't help but do, is this powerful system. And that human agency that says, here is what I want to be and become, is so small with respect to it. And we need to nurture that agency. And we want technology that helps us nurture that. So just to forget about AI for a second. It's wild to me that, my phone, YouTube, there's no way to tell YouTube, I'm going on a trip to India in a few weeks. I really want to learn more about New Delhi culture and about the place that I'm going to be entering. And please put into my feed some part of that, because I as I'm scrolling, I would love to be educated in that. That's actually not that hard to make. As an engineer, I know how to make that feature. Why doesn't it exist? Because the competition for attention has crowded out our agency, right? And there's been the great lie of the 20 teens technology is that you must want what you can't help but do. That those are somehow the same thing. And that's not true. What I want is deeper than what I can't help but click on. Okay. And so fast forward to AI. AI could be the perfect steward for our agency. It could help us become the people we want to be, connect to each other, build stable institutions, make better decisions, understand what's real versus what's not, understand, stabilize our psychology. Or it could erode all of those things. We must demand technology that helps us be the people we want to be.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Building on the psychology point that you were making, I have, of course, heard a lot of people say or explain how even though technology has evolved so fast in the past years, our psychology is still the same as who we were a few thousand years ago, right? Humans have not evolved to that point. So, what do you think we can do to kind of make sure that, as you said, technology accelerates our growth and does not impede it?
So this is the age-old question: is nature or nurture, right? Are we this way because of our innate nature, or are we this way because of our environment? The answer, like most things, is yes. We're both, right? Every generation is quite different than the last generation because of the changes to our environment, and much to the dismay of young adults, there are things about the human condition that are the exact same, and the older generation can see those things that are the same that we dismissed when we were your age, that now we look back and we go, yeah, but I wish I could tell my younger self that it's the same. It's actually the same, right? So picking this apart, what's the same and what's different? What's novel and what's timeless? Philosophers way smarter than me have written whole books on this. It's a very hard problem. I think part of what you're interested in with respect to this and AI is the question of like, is our development changed because of our interaction with our technology? I mean, you tell me what part of this you're interested in, because we could go a lot of different directions in the question of.
Absolutely. I remember when you had mentioned technology designs us eventually, right? That I found that really interesting. So if you could go in that direction.
We make this mistake over and over again in our history, where we tend to think of ourselves as these strong actors. I have a goal, and then I use a technology to attain my goal. But that's not how technology works, right? And thinkers from Marshall McLuhan to Neil Postman, both incredible authors. If anyone's interested in this topic, read Neil Postman, read Marshall McLuhan. Neil Postman has a great quote that he said, technology is not additive or subtractive, it's ecological. That adding a new piece of technology is like adding a new species to an ecology. It doesn't just add something, it changes everything. It changes the relationship of everybody to everybody else, right? So adding social media, for example, into the landscape of communication, it didn't just add something, it changed fundamentally the way that we relate, the status games that we play on, how people win, how people communicate. All of that suddenly changes, right? Same thing. You add AI into the middle of something. You add even just a chat bot or a companion bot. Like, forget about AI. AI means so many things. You change technology, it changes everything. There's a quote from Winston Churchill, who talked about this with buildings and architecture. He said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us," I think was the quote. And this is true of technology. Like, we design our technology, but afterwards our technology designs us. We become shaped by this, and this is part of the damage we did to ourselves in social media in the last decade. Was we designed technology, but we didn't think through how that technology would design all of the human interactions, right?
So, like right now, we're going through a paradigm shift, as you have mentioned many times before, wherein instead of communicating through technology, we communicate to technology, which then communicates for us. Do you see a future where this could go right, where like companies could use the fact that we're communicating to technology to reverse the damage which social media has done in terms of polarization and echo chambers in the last 10-15 years?
It's a good question. So let's take one small example. each of us have different micro dialects. Like it seems like we're speaking the same language, in this case, English, but a lot of human miscommunication happens because the associations I have with a word are different than the ones you have with the word. In fact, there was a famous international relations incident. I forget the country, but it was in Africa. There's a famous international relations incident where I think it was a former head of state of the U.S. He went into the country. He was saying that something needed to change, and the reporter said, "Okay, but are you serious?" And he took offense at this. He said, "What do you mean? Of course I'm serious." And then the reporters wrote all these headlines because what serious meant in the local dialect of English, serious meant actions on the ground. What the reporter was actually asking is, "Are you going to invade?" I mean, are you serious? Are you going to put troops on the ground? What the head of state thought they were saying was, "Do you mean what you're saying? Are you serious?" Okay. And so these little differences in how we use words are different even between you and me. They're different between my colleagues. And there's this a huge amount of human effort that's wasted because I say something and you interpret that in a different way. And AI could play a part in realizing, okay, the way being translator, English to English translator between both of us and saying, here's what he's trying to get across and putting it in terms that you believe. Okay, but at the exact same time as it could help us bridge misunderstandings, it can actually inject other misunderstandings because, and this gets back to incentives, when is AI actually revealing what I meant and when might it be covering for me? So, for example, we're already seeing friends, colleagues that are using AI to massage communication before they send it. So I write something up and I use the AI to say, well, I'm about to send it to you. Tell me, would he like this? And AI in that time is not being used to reveal my intentions. It's being used to obscure my intentions, to replace what I really meant with something that you would find more easy, more palatable. So all of which is to say, again, the double-edged sword of AI. We can design AI in a way that helps us understand each other, or we can design AI in a way that confuses us all about our motivations, our intentions, our actions. And this is part of the problem is, I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts, right? Because you're in school right now, but it's breaking tests and assessments, right?
Absolutely.
And essays.
Yeah.
I'm curious about hearing from you because this is an example of AI confusing us all.
Yeah, I mean, now a well-written essay is no longer a measure of how good someone is at English.
That's it.
That's definitely true. And oftentimes, what many schools do is, then we don't have access to AI or the internet or any other tools while giving our tests and exams, so they still remain as a somewhat reliable measure of our ability. But yeah, homework assignments and things like that are definitely impacted.
What's something that actually you think I don't actually understand about the way that AI is changing the nature of the student, what it is to be a student in your.
That's a very interesting question. I guess many people just make the assumption wherein, okay, a student's using AI, they'll directly cheat, copy off of it, and get their work done with. But what actually many students are doing is instead using AI as a study companion, to enhance their understanding of a particular topic. Personally, a prompt which I love giving to AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude: "You are a grumpy reviewer. Please tear apart my arguments."
Yeah, that's a good example of you've learned curiosity and metacognition, right? Yeah.
So that's something I love using, and it's definitely very helpful to throw my ideas at. Um, so yeah, I mean, many people often overlook the positive aspects of this, especially in education. So you often compare our situation with AI right now to what social media was in like 10, 15 years ago. Do you see any divergence, or do you see anything different to what's going on right now as to what was going on before, or do you see history just repeating itself?
It's a great question. I should say up front, there's massive differences, right? There's a huge amount of difference. One is social media was just a communication technology. AI is not a communication technology. It's a cognitive technology. It's oil, like, crude oil, petroleum was to physical labor, replaced physical labor, and AI is sort of the petroleum for cognitive labor. It is doing something at a fundamentally different level. So there is a mistake that people make saying history is just repeating or it's the same as social media. But there are lessons we can take from social media. And the lessons that are the same are we had these simple stories, right? And forget about just social media. Let's go back even farther. The internet was just going to make everyone more well-informed. It was going to take the academy and bring it to the world. I believe that, growing up as a kid of the 90s. The internet was just going to make everyone have access to the world's best information. It was going to create the most literate societies on the planet. Fast forward, literacy is actually declining in the US for the first time in 40 years. Okay. Social media, it's just going to connect the world. It's going to connect us all to each other. We're going to have our friends, our hobbies, our interest groups. We've all been disconnected. We're going to be more connected.
Now we're even lonelier.
Now we're even lonelier. Not just lonelier, but outraged. Families fighting families because of something that got said online. Meanwhile, again, the architecture got changed. So things that you said used to be ephemeral. You used to be able to say something and go, that was stupid, and then realize because you said it out loud and you realized it was stupid, and then you say something different. Now, everything that you say is recorded for posterity, and people bring it up and say, you said this, okay, that's an issue. So the thing that's the same is that our simple, beautiful stories about the future that we're building give way to a much deeper and more troubling reality because the world is more complex than these stories. So that is the parallel. Like that's the thing that we're saying you need to learn from social media.
Got it.
Where it breaks down is this is, again, the largest infrastructure build out in human history. This is about so many different things, from international warfare to an entire overhaul of the global economy to a replacement of what education and cognitive labor means. This is not one tool, one normal technology. This is a fundamental change to the way that we run our societies. That's different, and this will require new language. Just to pile on one more answer is, I always think that people fight the last war. Like we look backwards at the last thing that just happened to us, and that gives us the toolkit to try to talk about the next thing. It's important to use the lesson you just learned to have the language to talk about the next thing, but it's important to not think, to not fight the last war, to not think, oh, we're just doing another version of the thing that came before. This is truly novel, and it requires us to invent new language to even know what we're talking about. And that's the deepest quest around the philosophy of this is, can we design the language that is adequate to talk about the new challenges that AI creates?
So, again, on this tangent of comparisons, do you think it's accurate to say that AI is for cognitive labor, but the industrial revolution was for physical labor? And like, to what extent do you agree with those comparisons? And I mean, just piling on another question, many students often compare AI to the use of a calculator, which is of course not entirely correct because with a calculator you still have to know how to frame the problem, whereas with AI you can just copy paste it in. But what do you think about that?
Well, I'm also curious what you think about it. Do you want me to answer first? Do you want to answer first?
I think you should answer first about the industrial revolution thing, then we can discuss that.
So again, all metaphors lie and they tell the truth. So a metaphor is a device that reveals something and it hides something. The thing that I like about the metaphor of oil is it shows how powerful and transformative it is, right? There's very few of us who are laboring with our hands in fields anymore, or because oil has taken the brunt of that physical labor in many different ways. So that part, I think, the metaphor shows you how transformative it is on society. The lie is it paints it as if it's a static resource, but AI has intentions, motivations, language, action. It's a motive thing, right? I don't want to call it a creature necessarily, because actually part of the goal is to actually design AI that's not like a creature. We want an AI that's like a tool. But we are de facto building AI that is acting in ways that we don't understand in the world. And that means it's not like oil. It's not, the game of just capture the resource and use the resource to build your society. And that I think is the problem, is too many heads of state, too many heads of industry believe that it's just like oil. Oh, it's just like oil. That means we need to be first, we need to capture the resource, and then we'll get our society. And that's the thing that we think is a lie. Because if you're designing a technology that is not interpretable, it's not understandable, it's maybe not controllable, you're not going to get the benefit by running headlong at that society.
Got it. So, after physical labor is gone, now cognitive labor is also no longer something uniquely human. You have talked at length about the sheer amount of uncertainty we're living in right now as to what humans will do in a post-AGI world, for example. But do you have any personal opinions or personal ideas as to how that could play out?
This is the kind of thing that dates you terribly. Like this is the kind of thing that in 2 years you look back and everyone making these predictions out loud is going to be
Yeah.
devastatingly wrong, right? But it's not the idea that I'm not just averse to being wrong, right? It's not that. I think I do want to juke away from the question, and the reason I want to do that is I think so many people, it's a sexier problem to think about the post-abundance world, right? I think it's a more important problem to say before we ever get to that world, we can destabilize our society in so many ways before we get to AGI, before we get to abundance, before we get to these futures. We could undermine the very fabric of our world that holds our societies together, that holds our relationships together, that holds meaning and purpose together. Um, and so what I worry about is that people are so focused on the sexy philosophical problem of what do we do when we hit the age of abundance, that they're not feeling society start to fray already with the tech that we've already released.
Got it.
Now, it doesn't mean that I won't play in your question. I'm happy to play in the question, um, but I fear that there's so many lines of text, there's so much ink spilled about what do we do in that beautiful world that we're not paying attention to the more urgent problem right now.
So I'd say the student community is just divided. There's no single answer as to people. Some people think it's the same, some people think it's different, some people think their use is justified, others think that they're stopping, like, not understanding problems as deeply anymore. Yeah, it's just a divided community, to be honest. What do you think? Is there any merit to either of those arguments? Like,
Yeah, I was just talking. I think I mentioned her earlier, Rebecca Winthrop at Brookings, about this. Our podcast is just going to get released, but um, there's this notion called cognitive offloading. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. Look, I think it's entirely the analogy of the calculator is reasonable in some sense. After I've learned how to do something, do I really need to just do it over and over and drill it and do it over again? No, right? There are things that an AI can do to help solve rote intellectual work, boilerplate, things that are just boring. But the risk is that you never actually understand how it works. You never understand, and instead of understanding how to write from scratch, how to take an idea and discover what you actually think about it. Again, the beautiful part is the tyranny of the blank page is dead. I mean, it's amazing to me. There are kids growing up now that won't understand the sheer terror of staring at a blank page and not knowing how to get started. Whether that's an essay, a business plan, a research paper, like it's now easy to go, tell me what a B plus version of this looks like, and you can feel it, and in feeling it, you can then go, okay, like maybe I want it more like this, or maybe I want it more like this, and that's wonderful. That's all to the good. The problem is the opposite thing of what happens when you never actually learn and understand how to structure your mind in a way that lets you understand topics, that lets you understand the world. And educators around the world are grappling with this question, like how do I actually make kids engage with the hard work of learning and struggling and grasping. There's a concept called the zone of proximal development, right? If something is too hard, you'll struggle with it and be like, it's too hard, I can't start it. But if it's too easy, you're never actually going to do the learning. So you have to keep you in this uncomfortable place. Like learning happens when you're slightly over your skis, you're uncomfortable. And in a perfect world, we can be designing AI. Again, we can be designing AI to keep you there, that helps you learn. Or we can be designing AI that just replaces everything, that makes everything so easy, that makes it so you never actually have to build and develop the skills. And that's the great challenge. And, is it one or it's the other? No, it's both. And it depends on the designs. And there is a bunch of people trying to learn what does AI look like in an educational context that helps us grow. And that's a great challenge.
understood. So I was thinking about how you mentioned that AI is philosophy on a deadline, and how self-driving cars have to solve the trolley problem in code, basically. While we don't have any ideal solution, I was just wondering what you think about the current existing frontier models, and what their ethical biases are, or what systems they are following when they have to make decisions like this.
That's maybe beyond my knowledge. And the wild part about AI right now is this is my full-time job, is to keep up with all the developments, and I feel stale. Like I feel like any answer I would have to that question is probably a year or two old, and it's probably not relevant anymore. And so that's it's wild to me. And what about you? I mean, do you have any reflections on the values of the frontier models? And
Well, I mean, I think the frontier models have gotten very good at reasoning from different perspectives. If I explicitly ask it, okay, apply all of these ethical things. So, personally, I've taken part in ethics Olympiads before.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
lots of case studies and things like that. So, if I ask it to specifically apply theories and, weigh different ideas in context, it's able to do that quite well. But yeah, general bias wise, I haven't been on the lookout for that. So, I don't know.
You bring up a very important point, though, and it's a very deep point about AI that people don't understand. People assume that AI has one personality or one vantage, when actually AI has learned the space of multiple personalities. So if you say, take this from the perspective, from this perspective, from a second wave feminist perspective on this topic, from the perspective of a South Indian view of this topic, from the perspective of a autistic technologist, whatever, it understands patterns, and both personality wise, actually, if I just back up, people assume that they know the personality of the model they're engaging with. I get it. It behaves like this. It's this personality. No, that's the personality that you have drawn out of the machine. And you're in this weird dance where the more you treat it like that, the more it becomes that. And some of the earlier models, like what are called the base models, before AI fine tunes, before the companies fine tune it and say you're a helpful assistant, you do this, you don't do this. Before that happens, the base models have just learned all the patterns of human behavior. So on the internet, when they learn how to autocomplete, there's weird psychological patterns. Like there's escalating aggression is one pattern. Somebody says, like, excuse the language, but somebody says screw you, and this robot says no, screw you, and then it kind of escalates. AI has learned all these different patterns of human behavior. And so it doesn't have one personality, it has many. And so that's the point you were making, is you can prime an AI into many different viewpoints.
So I guess in a nutshell, AI is what you want it to be.
I mean, ish. I mean, you can draw many different kinds of things out of an AI, because an AI isn't just one perspective.
Got it. I'm really thankful for the discussion we had today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Shiv Nadar School Podcast. Until the next one, stay curious and keep learning.